Breaking news. The role of a powerful lobbying firm in preventing sanctions against an oligarch with ties to Vladimir Putin. A number of high-profile Russian officials and others were targeted in legislation introduced in the United States weeks before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. Several of them were hit with sanctions by the Biden administration. While many of the original targets paid the financial price, two wealthy Russian businessmen were spared. And the two were connected in another way. Both had investment groups that hired the Washington, D.C. lobbying firm BGR, which secretly discussed the sanctions approved by the Putin Accountability Act with members of Congress's staff. Fox News contributor and ex-CIA Moscow chief Daniel Hoffman is an advocate for the oligarchs. Hoffman's criticism of Vladimir Putin had been made public. However, Hoffman, a member of BGR's advisory board, defended a Russian businessman the European Union has labeled one of Vladimir Putin's closest oligarchs. U.S. sanctions against Petr Aveyan, a Russian businessman, and his associate Mikhail Friedman were announced in August. It took about 18 months to levy punishment, but the story of how they tried to avoid it is a classic tale of influence peddling in Washington. Early in 2022, after the release of the sanctions list, the campaign began in earnest. According to a Hill staffer who requested anonymity to discuss private conversations, BGR lobbyist Walker Roberts contacted them inquiring about the sanctions target list. Another Hill employee who worked in a pro-bill office recalled being contacted by BGR about the individuals named in the Putin Accountability Act. BGR's clients have included the largest private bank in Russia, Alfa Bank, as well as the largest investment firm in Luxembourg, Letter One. Aveyan was once the president of Alfa Bank and later helped found the company Letter One with his partners. According to an interview with BGR's spokesperson Jeff Birnbaum, the company will no longer be working with Alfa Bank as of the year 2020. He revealed that Letter One had tasked BGR with keeping an eye on and reporting on sanctions legislation like the Putin Accountability Act. According to Birnbaum, when Walker talked to them, he was simply trying to find out what criteria the staff was using to determine which entities should be subject to sanctions. He was just supposed to find out how things were being done and report back to Letter One. He wasn't advocating for anything. He claimed that Roberts had no recollection of bringing up Aveyan, and that Letter One is no longer affiliated with Aveyan. Given the evidence, Birnbaum argued, Roberts would never deny that Aveyan knew Putin. Roberts wasn't the only BGR insider accused of trying to sway public opinion about Aveyan, though. Two attendees at an early 2022 meeting between Fox News contributor and CIA veteran Hoffman and Hill staff said that Hoffman was brought to the meeting through an intermediary to discuss Russia and the war in Ukraine. The gathering took place in a townhouse close to the Capitol building. Hoffman established his credibility as a Russia expert during the meeting. He stressed the significance of showing solidarity with Ukraine. One of the meeting's participants claims that he then transitioned into a discussion of the Putin Accountability Act. Hoffman said that Congress should not trust people who pitch them ideas, and he wondered where the list of possible sanctions targets had come from. According to one of the Hill staffers, Hoffman specifically inquired as to whether or not anyone had requested the inclusion of Aveyan on the list. According to one of the Hill aides, Hoffman claimed that Aveyan was not an ally of Putin and that sanctioning him would only strengthen the Russian president. He also implied that those seeking to punish Aveyan were linked to the Steele dossier. Due to the allegations of interference in the 2016 election, Aveyan, Friedman, and a third party filed a lawsuit against the dossier's creator and the company that commissioned the research. The two listeners picked up on the fact that the TV personality was supporting an oligarch. The second witness recalled that Hoffman supported a businessman, but he forgot the man's name. Hoffman did not file as a lobbyist on behalf of Aveyan, Alfa Bank, or Letter One. Hoffman's silence in response to questions about the incident was deliberate. While acknowledging that he was surprised and disappointed by the U.S. sanctions, Aveyan chose to remain silent on the matter. Hoffman's advocacy is emblematic of a larger trend in the nation's capital. The visibility afforded by appearances on cable news networks allows power brokers to project an image of access and influence. In 2018, Hoffman joined the BGR board of directors and began contributing to Fox News. Hoffman's name has been mentioned in the same breath as Avayan's before. Hoffman, according to a report by The New Yorker's Dexter Filkins in 2020, had asked to be put in touch with a source whose organization had discovered that Alpha Bank servers had looked up a server associated with the Trump Organization. According to Filkins's article, Hoffman claimed it was for a news story. BGR, who lost their Alpha Bank client in late 2020, now represents Letter One. After the European Union imposed sanctions on Letter One in 2022, Avayan and his associate Mikhail Fridman resigned from the board. According to the EU, Avayan is one of Vladimir Putin's closest oligarchs, and is in frequent contact with the Russian leader. The EU claims that in the 1990s, when Putin was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, Avayan, who was then Minister of Foreign Economic Relations, assisted Putin in a corruption investigation. The EU claims that Putin offered Avayan political support in exchange for his loyalty. Avayan has made an appeal against the punishments. Russian decision-makers responsible for the annexation of Crimea and the destabilization of Ukraine benefited from Avayan's active support, according to the sanctions document. According to the article, he also supported actions or policies which undermine or threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. Roberts has reportedly continued lobbying for the company, this time for Letter One, both before and after the conflict in Ukraine broke out. The United Kingdom's approval of Avayan came soon after the war began. The allegations of him breaking sanctions have prompted an investigation. The United States did not join its Western allies in imposing severe sanctions on Avayan until August. Given that Avayan and others had sued Fusion GPS and the firm's founder over the materials, which included alleged information about Donald Trump's ties to Russia, the staffers claim that Hoffman mentioned the Steele dossier as noteworthy. After Russia invaded Ukraine, they decided to abandon the lawsuit. The lawsuit's documents, however, also showed how BGR helped Avayan and Fridman's reputations. Their company's history with BGR dates back to the 1990s, and the firm has assisted them in arranging meetings with U.S. officials as part of an initiative to, at the very least, improve their public image. Avayan and Fridman, two lobbyists, met with then Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson in 2008. During a deposition in 2020, Avayan praised BGR for its work for his companies. They provided consultancy services with respect to various matters in the United States of America because while we lived in the Soviet Union, we didn't know the first thing about how things worked in the U.S., he said. They made some introductions in the White House, Congress, and the Senate. In his deposition, Fridman was asked if he was familiar with Hoffman. He answered in the affirmative. When asked if Hoffman was paid to publish negative op-eds about the Steele dossier, he said that Fridman did not compensate him for doing so. Fridman knew Hoffman was on BGR's advisory board, but he did not recall any interactions between Alpha or Letter One and Hoffman.